Atik Rumi bringing you the news on Gold FM.
The news headlines on Gold FM.
In your headlines, Sri Lanka observes traditional oil anointing ritual. Special transport services commence as New Year holidaymakers return to Colombo. Sri Lanka repatriates 240 Iranian sailors. Apparel exporters call for market diversification. Washington prepares for second round of Iran negotiations in Islamabad. Israel-Lebanon talks yield no fruits, but agrees to future discussions. Secretary of Sri Lanka Athletics resigns.
The top story on Gold FM.
US President Donald Trump confirmed that a second round of face-to-face negotiations with Iranian officials could commence within the next 48 hours in Pakistan. Speaking from Washington, the president indicated that Islamabad remains the preferred venue for the diplomatic effort, praising Pakistan Field Marshal General Asim Munir for his role in facilitating the process. The announcement comes as the current ceasefire approaches its expiry next week, with both nations seeking a diplomatic off-ramp despite a marathon 21-hour session last weekend ending without a formal agreement. While the president expressed optimism that something could be happening, he remained firm on the dismantling of Iran's nuclear capabilities, rejecting any proposals for a long-term enrichment pause. Sources close to the administration suggest that Vice President J.D. Vance will likely return to lead the American delegation, with support from Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. Tehran has signaled its intention to remain at the table to expose what it describes as untrustworthy American behavior. In contrast, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres described the resumption of talks as highly probable, noting that such complex, long-standing conflicts rarely find resolution in a single session. In an interview with the international media network Fox News, Trump said the war with Iran is very close to being over. Simultaneously, a significant diplomatic shift occurred in Washington as senior officials from Israel and Lebanon engaged in their first direct negotiations in over 4 decades. Chaired by U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, the meeting between Lebanese Ambassador Nada Hamadeh Moawad and Israeli Ambassador Yechiel Leiterb was described by the State Department as a constructive preliminary step. While the talks cover the potential for a comprehensive peace deal and the return of displaced persons, Israel has refused to commit to a ceasefire in southern Lebanon. Even though the talks have concluded with no clear agreement reached, both sides agreed to launch formal negotiations at a mutually agreed time and venue in the future. Ambassador Leiter emphasized that Israeli military operations remain focused on the security of its citizens and the neutralization of Hezbollah, which he claimed is currently at its weakest state. The humanitarian situation in Lebanon continued to deteriorate, with the Lebanese Health Ministry reporting at least 35 fatalities within the last 24 hours due to ongoing Israeli strikes. Ambassador Hamadeh Moawad used the Washington summit to call for an immediate cessation of hostilities and the preservation of Lebanese territorial integrity. Despite the dialogue, Israeli forces have intensified their offensive in areas such as Bint Jbeil, where several soldiers were reported severely injured. On the economic front, the US-led blockade on Iranian ports along the Strait of Hormuz has entered its second day, severely curtailing maritime traffic. US Central Command reported that at least 6 merchant ships were forced to turn around, while shipping data indicates a 90% drop in daily transit through the vital waterway. The International Monetary Fund issued a stern warning that continued disruption to global oil markets and shipping routes could push the global economy toward a recession. Moreover, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance has defended the administration's military posture against criticism from the Vatican. Addressing a conference in Georgia, the Vice President challenged Pope Leo's recent assertions regarding the morality of war, questioning whether the pontiff would similarly condemn the liberation of France or the Holocaust camps during the Second World War.
So I think some people, their reaction to this is to say, well, he shouldn't have said that. And look, there are certainly things that the Pope has said in the last few months that I disagree with. Let me just take one very concrete example related to this conflict in Iran. So the Pope said something where he said, and I'm gonna try to remember the exact quote, but he said that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword. God is never on the side of those who wield the sword. I'm pretty sure that he said that exact statement. Now, on the one hand, again, I like that the Pope is an advocate for peace. I think that's certainly one of his roles. On the other hand, how can you say that God is never on the side of those who wield the sword? Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated France from the Nazis? Was God on the side of the Americans who liberated Holocaust camps and liberated those innocent people from, those who had survived the Holocaust? I certainly think the answer is yes. And I agree. Jesus Christ certainly does not support genocide. I think it's very, very important for the Pope to be careful when he talks about matters of theology. And I think one of the issues here is that if you're going to opine on matters of theology, you've got to be careful. You've got to make sure it's anchored in the truth. And that's one of the things that I try to do. And it's certainly something I would expect from the clergy, whether they're Catholic or Protestant. Now,
while expressing admiration for the Pope as an advocate for peace, the Vice President insisted that the administration remains focused on a grand bargain that ensures Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon while allowing the Iranian people eventually to rejoin the world economy.
the United States had never had meetings at that level with the Iranian government in 49 years. Like it's a meeting that had never before happened. Not Democrat, not Republican. We had never had a meeting like that where you have, the person who's effectively running the country in Iran sitting across from the Vice President of the United States. That had never happened. Look, honestly, after 49 years, there's a lot of course, mistrust between Iran and the United States of America. You're not going to solve that problem overnight. But yeah, I think the people we're sitting across from wanted to make a deal. And I know the President of the United States told us to go out there and negotiate in good faith. That's what we did. That's what we're going to keep on doing. So you never know, though. But here's where we are on, fundamentally, the President set a policy. Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. And right now, we are negotiating to make sure that very thing happens. What's interesting about this is that we have this ceasefire that's in place. I think it's 6 or 7 days old. Right now, this ceasefire is holding. And what you're seeing is what the President wants to make, he doesn't want to make like a small deal. He wants to make the grand bargain.
This is the local news on Gold FM.
Steps were taken yesterday to repatriate more than 240 Iranian naval personnel who were under the care of Sri Lanka back to Iran. The group consisted of 38 sailors rescued from the Iris Dana and 204 sailors from the Iris Bushehr. These individuals were previously held at detention centers in Valisara and Kogala. The naval group departed the island from the Bandaranaike International Airport in Katunayake via a special Iranian aircraft. This move followed the earlier repatriation of the bodies of 84 Iranian sailors who died when the Iris Dana was struck by American torpedoes in international waters off Gaul on the 4th of March. The auspicious time for the Sinhala and Tamil New Year oil anointing ritual occurred at 6:55 a.m. today. Observers dressed in green faced east while placing kohomba leaves on the head and kolon leaves under the feet for the ceremonial bath involving oil and kohomba leaf extracts. The state ceremony took place at the Natha Devalaya grounds within the Temple of the Sacred Tooth Relic premises in Kandy. Separately, the Surya Sinhala Hiru Aurud oil anointing ceremony, organized by Hiru TV, was held at the Kalaniya Rajamahaviharaya. The event proceeded under the patronage of the chief incumbent of the Kalaniya Rajamahaviharaya, Venerable Kollupitiye Mahinda Sangarak Hittatera. The auspicious time for departing for emergency duties in the new year falls at 5:38 a.m. the day after tomorrow. Meanwhile, the time for departing for general employment is set for the 20th of this month at either 6:27 a.m. or 6:50 a.m. The official schedule of auspicious times further indicates that the timing for planting saplings falls on the 23rd of this month at 9:01 a.m. Special transport services for people returning to Colombo after the Sinhala and Tamil New Year begin today. Sri Lanka Transport Board Chairman Sanjeeva Kanagaratne stated that these operations commenced this afternoon. He further revealed that the SLTB earned a record income exceeding 600 million rupees between the 9th of this month and yesterday. The Railway Department announced that several special train turns are in place for the public returning from their hometowns. However, Lanka Private Bus Owners Association Chairman Gamanu Vijayaratnam noted that only 30% of private buses operate today due to the New Year season. Meanwhile, the Road Development Authority earned an income of 196,119,425 rupees from vehicular traffic on expressways over the past 4 days. The government must seriously look into the expansion and promotion of renewable energy infrastructure in the country. Further, new markets are essential as far as market diversification is concerned. These thoughts were expressed by the Joint Apparel Association Forum against a backdrop where the apparel sector is grappling with rising energy and electricity costs and the effects of the Middle East war. Around 40% of Sri Lanka's export revenue is generated via the apparel sector. Speaking to us, Johan Lawrence, Secretary General of the association, explained the challenges faced by the sector at the moment.
So I think the impact is significant. I mean, on the one side, the crisis itself has led to huge increases in costs of shipping. So if you take the industry, typically all our raw material comes in from the Far East, and typically the raw material freight is borne by the manufacturer. So we're seeing significant increases on freight rates out of Far East, as also short, fuel vessels. So there's issues of timing and so on. And similarly on the export side, although of course the export freight is generally borne by the customer, but there are some instances where suppliers will sell on what's called the DDP, delivered duty paid basis, in which case the freight costs are also theirs. So the freight costs increase has been significant, and it's also added a lot of time into the process. The second challenge obviously comes from the increase in the price of fuel, which on the one hand we can understand is justified, but then we have to also see how that impacts the industry. So the higher cost of fuel coupled with the increased electricity tariffs, and I think it's probably inevitable that electricity will go up again given what we're seeing. I think the NOS has applied to PCSL for a further increase. So all of this is going to lead to huge cost increases to the industry at a time when demand is weak. We are seeing some gaps opening up in capacity.
To protect the businesses, Lawrence suggests that the government should look at renewable energy as far as power generation is concerned.
There are some things that have to happen, obviously, issues over electricity, the price of electricity, the issue over coal and so on. Those are issues that need to be resolved. And the country needs to aggressively pursue renewable energy, needs to look at open access and power wheeling so that you can really unlock renewable energy. Because if you look at it in the middle of all of this crisis, we have blazing sun and blowing winds, and we're just not taking the opportunities from them. So I think the challenge is for the country to look at policies which are going to really unlock renewable energy for the country, because at the end of the day, that is what's going to insulate us from shocks of this nature.
Finally, he highlighted the necessity of securing new markets for Sri Lankan apparel exports.
JAF's position has always been that we need to aggressively look at getting into preferential market access into the markets that will be of interest for our sector. That includes countries like Japan, like South Korea, like Australia. All of these new markets, we can only make progress in those markets if we make some progress on market access, because right now Sri Lanka is disadvantaged against our competitor countries. So unless we have an unlock there, with all the will in the world, you won't get a result.
Now for some news in brief.
The Department of Meteorology forecasts showers or thunder showers at several places in western, Sabaragama, central, southern and northwestern provinces and in Anuradhapura district after 1 p.m.
The business news on Gold FM.
Global oil benchmarks fell for a second consecutive day today, following statements from President Donald Trump suggesting peace negotiations between the United States, Israel and Iran could resume in Pakistan. Brent crude dropped to $94.27 a barrel, while West Texas Intermediate fell to $90.24. The potential for a diplomatic breakthrough offers hope for reopening the Strait of Hormuz, which remains largely blocked despite a 2-week ceasefire.
International news on Gold FM.
Around 250 Rohingya and Bangladeshis remain missing after an overcrowded trawler sank last week due to heavy winds and rough seas. The vessel, bound from Malaysia from Bangladesh, saw only 9 survivors rescued by the Bangladesh Coast Guard on the 9th of April. UN agencies stated that shrinking aid and dire conditions in refugee camps are forcing displaced people to attempt these dangerous maritime journeys.
Entertainment news on Gold FM.
Irish singer Moya Brennan, the voice of the Grammy-winning group Clannad, died peacefully at the age of 73, surrounded by her family. Known as the First Lady of Celtic music, she achieved global fame with hits like the theme from Harry's Game and sold millions of records throughout a career spanning 5 decades.
Sports news on Gold FM.
The current Secretary of Sri Lanka Athletics, Madhava Bandara Senanath, announced his decision to step down from his post. He informed Hiru News that his resignation letter reached the president of the association because a suitable environment to carry out planned activities no longer exists. The secretary further noted that additional discussions regarding his decision may occur with the executive committee of the association following the New Year holiday. That's it for the news. I'm Atik Rumi. Have a great day.